Welcome everyone to episode 10 of season 4 of the award-nominated Northern Spin podcast. I'm Michael Taylor by day. I'm the editor of Business Desk in the Northwest. And here's my happy clappy co-presenter, Chris Maguire, who is still celebrating our nomination in Elevate's Top 50 Northern Game Changers Awards, the only podcast in the awards.
No, thank you very much, Michael. Yeah, and you're celebrating doing your 3 Sudoku challenges in 25 minutes, the first time for a long time. So congratulations to you, Michael. I'm the executive editor of Business Cloud and Tech Blast, and we're joined in the studio this week by a very, very special guest. If you're watching this on YouTube, this build-up will be lost on you. I think it's vital that journalists hold our politicians to account. I've gone on record as saying that this mystery guest is doing a terrific job, in my humble opinion, and I'm not the only one. Now, I didn't think our special guest could go any higher in Michael's estimation, because he's a big fan, but I read last week that his other hero, Succession actor, Brian Cox, aka Logan Roy, described our mystery guest, and I quote, the perfect leader of the Labour Party. So, Michael, in your best Logan Roy accent, please introduce our special guest.
Chris, you are not serious people.
Can I just say, we practiced that before and he used the F word 4 times and we decided he couldn't. So, welcome, Andy Burnham.
Thank you, Chris.
So,
Thank you,
Andy, it's great to have you here with us. I thought you might be wearing leopard print, given Lee's success at the weekend.
Well, everyone else was at the Halliwell Jones. The sellers of leopard print clothing on Lee Market are doing a roaring trade with the rebrand of Lee Rugby League Club. So, no, it was an amazing thing, actually. I never, ever thought in my life I would see Lee get to a Challenge Cup final, but here we are.
Big day out at Wembley ahead then.
Big day out ahead, yeah. It could have been Lee Wigan.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Imagine if it had been Lee Wigan, but Wigan got knocked out yesterday.
But Hull KR, obviously, anyway, this is not the Northern Spin sporting podcast. It is a politics podcast. It's all about looking at politics and the news through a Northern lens, something obviously very close to all of our hearts. There's loads that we could talk to you about, sport included, but we want to give our thousands of listeners some continuity. So we're going to stick to our usual format. So it's what's in the news. We're going to go to a quick break. We've got our section called Anything to See Here, looking at things like the recent by-elections. And we've also got a section that you pop up in from time to time called On Manoeuvres.
Along with Ben Blocker-Houchin here.
Me, On Manoeuvres? Yeah. Surely not.
So they say. And then finally, as a fellow Northerner, you'll like this, we sign off with what we call the fun bit, where we try and educate this southern scruff on some aspects of Northern culture, which quite rightly could turn up to cricket, something which is actually close to both of your hearts. What else do we want to talk about, Chris? We're going to
talk about Gillian Keegan and the M Baccalaureate, which you're passionate about, the university rip-off, the station ticket office fiasco, and we're also going to talk a little bit about religion and the visit that you did to the Vatican not so long ago. But I'm going to go straight to Old Trafford, if I may, on Friday for the third day of the now washed out fourth test between England and Australia. Gutted it was washed out. I'm sitting there, and on the big screen, who should come up ringing the bell to signal the start of play? Fantastic honour, but your good self. So I'm going to try and bowl a few googlies of my own, if that's okay with you, Andy.
It was a great honour, actually, though. Just to be serious for a minute, I played there as a young lad. To think I'd ever be ringing the bell for the start of playing an Ashes test, well, I couldn't have ever thought that would happen. So it was great, actually.
Batsman or bowler?
Bowler.
Right. Well, I'll sign you up for my celebrity team then, Andy.
I was a decent player, and I'm not going to hold back from that, because I was a much better cricketer than I was a footballer. I've played both all my life, but I was better cricketer.
If you could have been a test match cricketer or the politician that you are, what would you have done?
Oh, cricketer.
Cricketer?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you could play sport at that level, you would. For me, I would swap everything for that.
Well, you've gone up in my estimation now, Andy. You are a consummate being a politician.
He's got all excited now. Anyway, that was just the intro. So we're going to go to a break. But first, I just want to give our thanks to our production company, What Media, who expertly produce this podcast every single week. They're the kings of video content creation. They turn our weekly ramblings into the hit weekly podcast that is Northern Spin. And on that note, we're going to go to our first interview and a few words from our sponsors, FI Real Estate Management.
FI Real Estate Management is not just your traditional property company. Founded in 1982 and managing assets totaling more than $1 billion, FI Real Estate Management pride themselves on going on the journey with their tenants. FI Real Estate Management, the property company with personality. Just like us, Michael.
If you want to join FI Real Estate Management to sponsor the show and reach a growing audience, then please get in touch with Chris or I or our friends at What Media.
Welcome back, everyone. Now, before we get into the details, Andy, I want to ask about the the deeper Devo deal that you've signed, devolution, everyone's talking about it. The idea of devolving power to a single source seems to be gathering pace. It's a momentum that can't be turned, at least you'd think it couldn't. Do you think that the idea of Devo now has found its time and found its place? And do you think that all the parties, including Labour, are fully signed up to it?
I certainly think that English devolution is the most functional part of British politics right now. The mayors across the big city regions and here as well have brought through lots of positive changes that otherwise wouldn't have happened. If you look at the Greater Manchester economy, we're growing faster than the UK economy. We have done for the last couple of years, and we're predicted to carry on doing so for the next couple of years. So there is a real success story here. And, I think it's finally giving this country more of that sort of bottom-up approach to decision-making that it's long needed.
So, Andy, you were first elected mayor in 2017, 6 years. We discussed this on our podcast on numerous occasions. What would you say your proudest achievements have been as mayor, but also what have been your biggest frustrations?
So, I'm on frustrations. We can probably talk about it, the Clean Air Zone. It's been in the news with what's gone on in the by-elections, the ultra-low emission zone in London. So, we could touch on that because that is a frustrating thing. But the big success, I would say, is the change that's coming to public transport. So it's not landed yet, but it is actually 2 months today that the B network goes live. I've taken the decision to put buses under public control, and I had to defend that decision from a legal challenge. So it's been a really tough journey, but we're there. We've made it. And public transport in Greater Manchester is about to go very yellow. Yeah. And it is going to change in a way that I don't think people can quite kind of see yet, but it will. It will be fundamentally different. It'll be a London-style public transport system. And that, I think, is going to take a city region that is already doing well and is a great success story. It's just going to take us up to another level. Yeah,
I don't know if you saw, but the Sunday Times yesterday, talking about Manchester as a centre for business, you got mentioned in dispatches on that one. The fact that businesses like TalkTalk, national global telecoms business, headquartered here in Salford Quays. Are there lessons that the Labour Party nationally can take from the relationships that you've built up with the business community?
I think the lesson is, and this was built before my time, by the way, I've just continued the approach set by people before me, Sir Howard, Sir Richard and others, is that long-term approach, number one. So be really clear about where you're going and don't keep jumping about from here to there, because sometimes Westminster politics does that, doesn't it? There's kind of reshuffles and you've got one thing and then all of a sudden it's all changed. I think Greater Manchester has benefited from being just really steady and clear about where we're going, and actually not being too political. Politics has a place, but it doesn't and shouldn't dominate everything, and the point scoring shouldn't dominate everything. It's about being pragmatic, isn't it? And working with people at that kind of level, and that's always been the Greater Manchester way, and it's something I've tried to continue.
You speak about transport, and the biggest inequality between the north and the south is clearly transport. Last week, 5 Labour MPs, led by you, launched legal action to prevent the closure of railway station ticket offices across England. Just checked your Twitter feed. You've been speaking about it quite recently. Do you honestly think that decision is reversible?
I do. Not just honestly think, I'm confident that it is, because take Northern Trains, their own equality impact assessment of the proposal, quite bluntly says that it's going to discriminate against disabled people. So fewer disabled people will be able to use the railway. On that basis alone, it should be stopped. We are very clear that they haven't used the correct process. So in the Railways Act, they're meant to take a very careful process to close any part of a train station. They haven't done it. They should have had a 12-week consultation. They haven't done it. So to answer your question, Chris, I'm confident. And this plays back to something I was just saying to Michael a moment ago. In the past, this kind of thing would just have been imposed by Westminster and it would have just gone through because, right near a summer recess, the Parliament rises, consultation's still ongoing, but, and then no one there to challenge it or speak out against it, it would have gone through. Yeah. The arrival of the mayors means that things now are getting challenged. Westminster is getting answered back. And that's a really good thing, because I think we're showing that we can bring an extra check and balance to British politics.
Yeah, speaking of the to and fro and the collision course that you're sometimes on with Westminster, which is inevitable. I mean, as you said, the legacy of Howard Bernstein and Richard Leese and other leaders in Greater Manchester is, yes, they work together, but occasionally they have to stand up to Westminster as well, which you've never been afraid to do, whatever type of jacket you're wearing. But Gillian Keegan, let's just move on to that. She seemed to deliberately misunderstand what you're trying to do with the Manchester Baccalaureate. See, I thought, and I've said this to you before, I thought you were effectively digging the Tories out of a hole on T-levels, which have not been widely adopted across the country, and certainly not got the level of cooperation that you've managed to get with the partnerships with the FE sector, with the Chambers of Commerce, and that kind of buy-in from the private sector. And yet in public, all they ever want us to do is diss you. But do you just take that as a rough and tumble of politics?
Yeah, I do. And that's how I pitched, as you say, to the Trailblazer process. I said, we'll make T-levels work. And I still am saying that to the government. And I hope we can move this forward positively. The Secretary of State said something that I do think needs to be challenged. She said, we don't want something different in Manchester than what we've got in Liverpool. Now, if you were talking about the academic route or the university route, well, I would probably agree with that because it's a national system, isn't it? Yeah. And it needs to be clear. But if you're going to say that technical education has to be done exactly the same everywhere, well, that explains why in this country we've never fixed technical education, because by definition it has to be more devolved, because the labour market here in Greater Manchester is different from the one in the Liverpool City region. So this, to me, that thinking explains why as a country we have obsessed on the university route, failed young people who want a technical qualification, and that's what's got to be fixed now at this moment in time. So I hope the Secretary of State will, listen to what we're saying. This is about a change that I think will benefit people in so many different ways. But I'm standing for a third term as Mayor of Greater Manchester, and just as transport has been my mission in this term, creating the country's first integrated technical education system would be my mission in a third term. I'm that serious about it. The Greater Manchester Baccalaureate, the MBAC, to balance the English Baccalaureate and the EBAC, two clear equal routes for kids at 14, one academic, one technical. It's got to be the way to go. And I'm, as I say, determined that Greater Manchester is going to be first.
Chris, did you have a question on that? You did, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. You sort of preempted it really in terms of the point that Gillian Keegan made when it was a soundbite, which is you don't want a different qualification in Liverpool to Manchester. But I think you've answered that. Walking to the podcast today, and for the purpose and the benefit of the listeners and the viewers, we're recording this on Monday. The Manchester Metropolitan University must have their graduation day, because there's some fantastic pictures of families proudly taking pictures of their loved ones today. And we're blessed with some fantastic universities, in this region as well. I didn't go to university. You did. Michael did. One of my daughters goes as well. Rishi Sunak, he spoke about rip-off degrees last year, didn't he? Last week, rather. Do you think there was a problem with rip-off degrees?
I think there's a problem, not in the way that he described it, though, because he tried to create a sort of hierarchy of subjects. This kind of thing that politicians have a habit of doing, which is to sort of minimize the creative subjects. They do that with the English Baccalaureate because creative subjects aren't in it, but they did it with degrees. He was kind of implying that an English degree like the one I had is of less value than an engineering degree. I dispute that. I think having control of language is critical in anything that you do, and an English degree can be highly valuable.
God knows what he makes of my sociology degree.
Well, but then he was doing a reception at Downing Street in the same week as having said this, saying, the creative industries are one of the UK's great strengths. And I thought, well, hang on a minute. He said that one day, and then he's praising the creative industries. In a city like this one, where we're all sitting now, where creativity is at the heart of brand Manchester, I would want to be saying to our 6 brilliant universities here, keep doing what you're doing and keep promoting those creative courses, because they're highly valuable as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I like that. 6 universities. So my next question was going to be, what do you make of the university sector here in Greater Manchester and what they offer? And I was going to include in that challenger institutions like Gary Neville's UA92, UCFB, the University of College of Football Business, BIM, where two of my lads went, and of course the Royal Northern College of Music. Creative subjects again, and doing something very different and very much more tailored to this market.
Yeah, I think it's a very diverse sector now, isn't it? Because of what UA92 have brought. I like their offer to students to always have a digital component to their course. I think that is good disruption within the university sector. But as you've mentioned, the others as well, I think they're relatable content, aren't they, for young people? To go back to the point though, I'll go some way to what Rishi Sunak was saying around the kind of the rip-off nature of higher education, in that I'm talking about my experience with my two kids. Two of my kids have been to university now, and hopefully another one to go. I don't think students are getting anything like value for the money that they're putting in. I don't think they're getting treated fairly. And I do think there are big questions to ask about the treatment that students receive from universities. And I'm talking more broadly, not specifically about Greater Manchester, and the value that they get for that investment. It's not about which courses are good and which courses are bad, which is what the Prime Minister was saying. I just do observe that mine went to universities outside of Greater Manchester, so this applies to different universities. But I don't think the treatment was good enough.
I would agree with you 100%. And I think what COVID did is everything went to Zoom and remote, and a lot of it stuck. And, they still wanted the same amount of money that they had before. And I've been shocked. As somebody who never went to university, I've been shocked at the way some universities operate. You mentioned Gary Neville's UA92, which not just Gary Neville, but he's the one obviously tends to get the headlines. On this podcast, one of the reasons I'm not a politician is I say things and then I change my mind, which wouldn't negate me being a politician. But people
you're in good company.
But people would.
We all do that.
But people would, kill me on social media. I've interviewed you a number of occasions. I've interviewed Gary Neville a number of occasions, and in one of my moments when I thought you go back down to Westminster, I thought, well, Gary Neville, he's nailed on to be a politician. He is a politician. He's joined the Labour Party as well. Well, what do you think of Gary Neville?
I've got huge respect for him, both as a footballer. I think Gary really kind of showed what application can do. I think he would admit himself he wasn't, the most technically talented footballer. But he got where he got to by willpower, application, mentality. And I think he brings that to everything that he does. I often say that he embodies this city that we're in that it's a place where people are encouraged to be entrepreneurial, to go back to that pro-business point. And Gary certainly is now highly successful in that regard as well, but never walking by on the other side. And obviously we've seen some of the things that he's done, the things he's given back to. And for me, he is, if you like, he classically embodies what the Greater Manchester spirit is all about.
So, Andy, you're writing a book at the moment with Liverpool Mayor Steve Rotherham, your good mate, entitled Look North, a rallying cry for a more equal Britain, with support, of course, from Liam Thorpe, great journalist from the Echo. How's that coming on, and is that going to be troubling our bestsellers list next year?
Well, I hope so. I hope it'll be certainly up there. It's great, actually. It's been a great process. And I don't know if people realise this, but Steve and I took a very conscious decision in 2016 to leave Westminster together. We had tried to get the voice of the North heard down there in that Westminster system, particularly over the Hillsborough disaster. People may remember that. And we both kind of come to the conclusion that it's just not set up to hear our voice in the way that it hears the voice of London and the South East. And we took a decision to try and build something different outside of Westminster. And I'm not sure whether we ever really conveyed that at the time, but we would, deliberately have done it together and have stood together on occasions when we've been raising issues. And the book now is a sort of really taking this further and saying devolution's reached a point here where it is now, I think, a very serious movement. It is changing our part of the world for the better, but we're kind of saying, if you really want to change this country, and if we really want the North to be everything it can be, we're going to have some sort of more fundamental rewiring of Britain now to really go with the early success that devolution has had. If you really want it to kind of deliver its full potential, we need to rewire Britain, and that's what the book will say.
So it's a manifesto for Burnhamism.
And Rotherhamism, that's a long word there, but no, I think it's what we're both about, and actually it's about these jobs, not us putting manifestos out for any other jobs. We're saying if the northwest of England is to be everything that we both want it to be, and we are, as you know, hugely passionate about this, we can't do it. We've done some things, and we're proud of those things, but we can't make it everything it could be without quite fundamental change, and that's what the book is about. And it's almost about saying, if we put northern values at the heart of running the country will be better for the southwest as well, and for the east, and all the other areas that get neglected.
So one of the things, a bit left field this, but when I did my master's thesis on devolution, I know it's not troubling any bestsellers list, but I was actively dissuaded by the academics who supervised me from pursuing a theory that I had about you and your politics and what devolution could mean in the regions of England. But it actually boiled down to the essence of what I think sits behind yours and Steve Rotherham's politics, which is rooted in Catholic social teaching. And my argument is you're always at your best when you're at your most Catholic, if you don't mind me saying.
I do know what you're saying.
No, caring for the poor and downtrodden, the stuff that you did for rough sleepers, Hillsborough, tainted blood victims, what you did straight after the arena attack, with the empathy that you showed for the people who'd suffered in that. Does that run as a current through what you're looking to extrapolate into a wider piece of work?
Well, it's a very perceptive observation, and I would say it is true, because that's where it began for me. I did read what was then called the Catechism. I don't think people do that anymore, but that was something that was part of my my education. Was a Catholic education, not overly sort of devout, but it was primary school and secondary school. I remember when I arrived in Parliament finally, my great mentor and friend who I miss every day was Paul Goggins. So Paul was very much in that tradition. And I remember I didn't know him before I got elected, but he kind of sought me out a bit when I arrived. And he said to me, I think we're a bit similar, we both, I'm City, you're Everton, but I know all about where you've come from and everything. And he said, just remember in here, the point of having power is to use it for people who don't have power. Paul famously did lots of work on prison reform and on contaminated blood, which you mentioned. And actually on that particular issue, I made a solemn promise to Paul that I would do whatever I could to move that issue forward on the back of what I'd done on Hillsborough. And thankfully, finally, it is actually after people being in the wilderness for years. So no, you're absolutely right, Michael. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm lapsed these days. I'm not going to make any great claim for my my religious sort of duties, but I'm not particularly religious like that anymore. But in terms of culturally and from an identity point of view, then definitely.
And Steve, would you answer?
No, Steve. No, I mean I've taught him a bit. We're just the same though. We're kind of coming at things from the same
moral character.
Viewpoint. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, completely. I guess it is. It's a difficult thing to admit in the heart of Manchester, but it is a bit of a Liverpool thing. And as you know, I have a bit of that Liverpool blood in me.
I think it's. I'm a Catholic. I'm a bit like yourself, really. I grew up a Catholic. I still am a Catholic, but I'm probably slightly lapsed. Fundamentally, I live my life by the idea that if you don't help somebody every day, you failed in your day. If you do that, you help the world. The world becomes a better place. And somewhere along the line, too many people lose track of that. One of the things we try and do with the Northern Spin podcast, and I should just mention, we are very big in Denmark. So if you want to get your book out to the Danish audience, we are the vehicle for that. Is we try and talk about some current stories. So the big story last week with the by-elections. The Finnish 1-1-1. The Lib Dems overturned a majority of more than 19,000 to win Somerton and Frome. Labour overturned a majority of 20,000 to win Selby and Ainsley. It makes you feel really old when the new MP is 25.
I felt old.
And the Tories retained Uxbridge and South Ruislip by just 495 votes. If you were given some insight into those three votes, what conclusions do you take?
That Labour are in a position now where they completely look as though they could form a strong majority government, because the Selby result particularly was huge, actually, in terms of the shift in public opinion. But there is a bit always. I think it still says there's just a bit more to be done to really seal that with people. So it's really good progress. It's really encouraging. The Uxbridge result was good, to be honest, and we can come back to the ULEZ. The Uxbridge result was pretty amazing, really. I don't think they've ever got that close, certainly not that I can remember in recent times. And that itself says that Labour are very close to government. The third result, obviously, the anti-Tory feeling is quite strong everywhere, including in areas that don't traditionally haven't voted Labour. So I would say all of the foundations are laid, but there is more to be done to just get that sort of more that emotional connection, if you like, to say right, it's definitely going to change. We've got to move it from anti-Tory sentiment to more pro-Labour sentiment, and I still think that's a sort of a process that's still underway.
Yeah, I want to ask you about caution, actually, because Labour's strategy that we've likened to it on this podcast, and others have as well, has been likened to walking across a highly polished floor, not unlike this one, whilst holding a Ming vase. Yet there's a caution behind a lot of what Labour are saying nationally, to the point where they can't even commit to something as overturning something as egregious as the 2-child limit on universal credit. Now, you've been here before with things like the vote on the welfare bill in 2015, where Labour gets snookered on these issues from time to time. Is that what you mean when you talk about that sort of purpose of giving people something to vote for and knowing what Labour stands for?
I think so. I think you've got to show your instincts, even if you can't commit to every policy and sign up to all of the funding implications that come with it. So, I think, but that I can understand why there's been caution to this point. But as we go into pretty much now a year, most people, I think, would predict a general election around October, November next year. As we're going into that sort of 14, 12-month period, I think just more of a kind of sense of what will be the guiding priorities of an incoming Labour government. So I think all of it is completely doable from here. But I do think that issue does, more needs to be said. You can't just leave it there, in my view. What will the next Labour government do about relieving child poverty? It matters massively, obviously, in a city region like this one, where you've got a huge number of families in temporary accommodation. And that actually is a situation created by the 2-child rule and the benefit cap. And it's something that nobody really should feel anything other than really uncomfortable about. So I think, as I say, I understand why they can't at this point commit to everything that everyone's asking them to do. I understand that, because I was part of Labour when we were last in opposition, and I remember the discipline around spending. That's right. But you can still give instinct, you kind of sense of your instincts.
I can't understand why nobody said we would never have brought this in. A Labour government would never have introduced something as awful as this.
Because you mentioned that vote in 2015 when it went through Parliament, because that's when that 2-child rule got adopted. Yeah. In the then Labour leadership contest, I was a contender, as you may know, and this does annoy me a bit. I did vote against it via a reasoned amendment. Yeah. And I moved the position of the then acting leader in the shadow cabinet, who were planning to abstain. And I said, no, we've got to take a position. But because a reasoned amendment wasn't as full-hearted as
standing in
fully voting against it, like Jeremy Corbyn did. But so we did oppose it at the time, actually. The Labour Party did oppose it in Parliament at the time, and I think we should be
it's the optics of it, though,
sticking to that now. Yeah, it is the optics. And I think the thing I would say is, of course, you've got to have a regard for where the polls are and what the public say on particular issues and the focus groups. But at the end of the day, what politics has taught me is you still have to be about something. You have to sort of be, even if it's not always the most wildly popular thing, you just have to say, well, this is what I personally believe in. And I think the public, being the great British public that they are, give credit for that. Even if they don't necessarily agree with everything you're doing, they still respect conviction and principle.
Can I come in there? Because we're mindful of time and your time as well. I just want to ask a little bit about you, Liz. We're recording this on Monday, like I mentioned. I've just come back from Greece, where the temperatures are 40 degrees. Tourist attractions are closed. And then we've had this weekend of rain in the UK. We talked about the situation at Uxbridge and Ruislip. It's interesting because some people would say that was a bad vote for Labour, because it was a 7,000 majority and Labour clearly identified that as a seat they could win. They narrowed it down to less than 500 votes. Everything's coming back to you, Liz, which is it's to improve air quality in London. It's relevant, for our audience, the Northern Spin audience, because the background to this is, although it was introduced by, it was agreed by Boris Johnson, it was Sadiq Khan who decided to expand it. So from August, if you've got a polluting vehicle, you could be paying an extra £12.50 a day to go into certain zones as well. But it's relevant to the clean air zones, which you've spoken about at the start as being your biggest frustration.
It seems to me that people do seem to be resistant to paying for measures to address climate change when it hits them in the pocket, and that must be a massive frustration, particularly given that you've committed this city region. We have a climate emergency, and you committed to net zero by 2035.
Yeah, my frustration though was more with the government and the way that they, I would say, quite dishonestly used that policy. So they had put a legal direction on the 10 councils of Greater Manchester. So it wasn't like, we just were acting without any requirement on us. There was a requirement on us. Don't get me wrong, there was still a decision to be taken here about what would be the right construct, and that was a local decision. I mean, the frustration was the government didn't fund it properly, so they didn't put the money up to help people change. And then the minute it started to get difficult, they were nowhere to be seen, and it was, and I just think that was the frustration from my point of view. I had realised actually in the middle of 2021 that we were not going to be able to make it work, because this was a plan drawn up pre-pandemic that landed in a post-pandemic world where things had really changed with regard to the cost of vehicles, the kind of waiting time to get a vehicle. And truthfully, it would have done what we'd always said we didn't want it to do, which was to hit people with taxes and not give them a way of avoiding them. So I look back at it and think we were actually right to pull out at that point and say, no, we're not, and we can't do it on this basis. And we're still in something of a standoff. But this gets me to the sort of heart of this issue, and I think this is one that goes beyond clean air zones and ULEZ proposals. We're going to have to get to a better place as to how we help people make the green transition. I don't think it can be done by big stick, hitting people with taxes, kind of making them change everything that they do. And, I just don't think that it gets you there. It's got to be a carrot incentive approach. Help people to do the right thing. Don't punish them because they can't do the right thing. That's, I think, the thing that we need to get to, where you give people, a different public transport system that's cheaper to use, and then they can do that and do the right thing. Actually, the B network will do more to clean up the air of Greater Manchester than any clean air zone would have done. And that was another frustration. It was quite narrowly focused on nitrogen dioxide, but air pollution is a bigger issue than that. And the thing that will change it is getting more people onto public transport and out of their cars.
Zero emissions buses, of course. Which
and we're bringing them through in great numbers now. 50 parked up in Wigan as we speak, and more on order for Oldham and Rochdale. So the B network is going to do a huge amount to clean up the air.
Brilliant, thank you. And on that note, we're going to go to another quick break.
So one of the businesses I'm involved in is Proactive Progress. Proactive Progress is a monthly meeting of ambitious Northwest businesses who grow through collaboration. Every month I hit my black book. We bring in a big name speaker and share experiences, challenges and opportunities. If you're interested in joining Proactive Progress, contact me. Lots of methods to do that, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever, or my business partner, Paul Woods. If you want to grow your business, do it through Proactive Progress.
back to part 2 of the Northern Spin podcast. This is the bit where we like to ask the question, anything to see here? So, Andy, my first question is this. Jamie Driscoll has left the Labour Party after being excluded from standing for the role of North East Metro Mayor over an appearance with film director Ken Loach. You and Steve Rotherham both very publicly criticised the decision to exclude Jamie from that list. Was this whole row of Jamie now leaving the Labour Party avoidable? And is it a case of something is to be seen here for Labour?
Well, our criticism was of the process. You know, I didn't think it was right that a sitting mayor could be taken out without a process of appeal.
And he'd have won as well, right? I mean, Kim McGuinness would have won anyway, I think.
Well, I would have said, test it in the selection, and that would be always a better way of doing it. So I made that argument with Steve, and I think it could have been handled differently.
Yeah. Now, Chris, you wanted to ask Andy about going back to Westminster.
I listened to your interviews, and I listened to one, and I thought, because you're a seasoned politician, you know what you're going to say and the impact it's going to have. You did an interview with Times Radio when you're talking about your plans to introduce a Manchester Baccalaureate, and you came out with some really strongly worded quotes, and you basically said it'd be great if if Westminster supported you. You also said that the Labour Party always seemed to be briefing against you, and you come out with some positive stuff as well. Now, some people took that as a bit of a dig from you about your relationship with Sir Keir Starmer. What would your take on that be?
No, I was very much focusing on those unnamed individuals who give quotes to newspapers. It's that Westminster culture, Chris. I fell out of love with Westminster. I mean, I think maybe that was obvious, but I really did. And it was that kind of climate where you're going about your work, and this happened when I was in the shadow cabinet, so it's not a new thing, but all of a sudden, unnamed in the newspapers, something, some derogatory comment about your policy or you, and it was so, honestly, it was like such a deflating sort of world to live in at times. And I honestly, I know you kind of, people endlessly ask me about going back to Westminster because they think I'm, plotting it, and that's what I'm really focused on. But it isn't. I love doing what I'm doing here. I've been so energized by being mayor of Greater Manchester because I don't have that negative culture that they all live in down in Westminster. And when that culture intrudes on my life here, I do. That's why you got those quotes on Times Radio. I just get, no, I'm sorry, you don't bring your sort of, your anonymous briefing to our world. We're doing positive things here. Stick to what we're doing. Don't just put this sort of poison out there.
But if Keir Starmer phoned you up the day after Labour win the general election, if they do, as seems likely, and he said, "Hi, it's Keir Starmer here. I don't do impressions, not like my colleague across the table." It's probably just as well.
I'm not sure about his. Yeah, there we are.
I don't know who his are sometimes, but he does a very good Tyson Fury one. But if he said, "Hey Andy, do you fancy watching Everton get beat 5-0 by Arsenal at the weekend? And by the way, fancy coming back to Westminster?" What would you say to him? And have you got that relationship with him?
What I would say is, Keir, I can do more for a Labour government from here, because I think any government, if they are to make a success of things in their first term, needs to get on with delivery straight away. And the combined authorities of England now, which are quite mature and quite established, could get on and make changes really quickly for a Labour government. For instance, building council housing, or let's call it future council housing, net zero homes for social rent. We could do that, and we could have them built in a first term. We could do a lot more to expand the B network very quickly. We could do what needs to be done with regard to rail when that gets brought into public ownership, which is a Labour commitment. That will need to be localised as well and brought into integrated transport. So there's so much actually of more value that can be done from here. And the problem with your question, Chris, is if we always have in our minds that Westminster is, at the end of the day, the only show in town, which is kind of implicit in the question, I don't think we'll ever change this country in the way that it needs to change. We are the most over-centralised country politically in the OECD. We're trying to run everything from one postcode in London, and that has created the north-south divide. That has failed. And what we're on with here, myself and Steve and Tracy in West Yorkshire and others, is building the fix to that, the kind of antidote to that London-centric way of running politics. And that's what I would say. We can do more from where we are. but back us where we are so that we can get on and deliver for your government.
But you didn't mention whether you'd go and watch Everton get beat 5-0 by Arsenal.
I've seen that happen many times, actually, and we never get a result there. I don't know why, but it's a bogey ground for us.
So, Andy, this is a section of the podcast that we often call On Manoeuvres, and your name does come up from time to time. That must massively frustrate you, doesn't it?
Well, it does.
For all the reasons you've just outlined.
You know, it's that thing, isn't it, of, you know, you go out there and you do something positive and, you know, what are they called? The Kremlinologists in Westminster kind of try and put another interpretation onto everything falsely, but that's what they do. And it has honestly been a bit of a frustration in this job. I've tried to answer the question honestly when people ask me, am I going back to Westminster? And the answer I've always given is maybe one day, but I'm not finished here. And that is a truthful answer. But the thing is, this is the funny thing about down there, isn't it? Because they don't deal in those type of answers, they will constantly take that and, you know, put some other interpretation onto it. But when I left, I took a real kind of self-denying ordinance just to, as my wife used to text me when I'd been on a media interview in capital letters, answer the question. Because I think that just frustrates people to hell, doesn't it, when they hear politicians give interviews. When I left, it meant I didn't have to have a line to take given to me by a whip or whatever, or you didn't have to vote a certain way. The power of devolution is you free up politicians to be themselves, to speak in their own voice. And that connects with the public. Surprise, surprise. So I've always had an approach to this job where I try my best to answer the question honestly. But when you do that, Westminster doesn't know what to make of it, and they try and put other spin on it. So I just think there's a clash of two worlds here, isn't there? This is a bit of a new world that's being created, that's operating to different kind of rules. And the old Westminster world can't really deal with it. I still think at the moment, they haven't got used to devolution. They don't like, I'm not talking just the party, I'm talking about the system down there. It doesn't like it when we answer them back as we did in the pandemic.
I hope Westminster, we're mindful of time, I hope Westminster listen to this podcast and listen to you answer the questions as well, because I think they could all learn a lot from that. We're going to go to a quick break before we come back to the final part of the Northern Spin podcast.
So I've always believed that a vibrant media sits at the heart of any community, and the business community is no different. So if you're in business, then the businessdesk.com is for you. We're up with the lark every morning to bring you the day's business news. We have regular events, credible news, and lots and lots of other events to bring people in the business community together. So log on now, thebusinessdesk.com, for all your regional news. Part 3 of the Northern Spin podcast with our special third member of the pod this week, none other than Greater Manchester Mayor himself, Andy Burnham. So, Andy, this is the fun bit, but I know you want to talk about something. I know you say that, but
no, it is. It's where I get nervous.
It is. No, it's where we try and get Chris, who is originally from Kent, but he's a proper adopted Northern. I think we've taken him on board now.
Is he more northern than southern these days, or do you?
I've been up here about 18 years.
Is he still a work in progress?
Well, you live in Chorley, don't you? And
live
you're
in
a
Chorley.
proper member of your community.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
do you
absolutely.
prefer the north? I'm going to ask him. Can I ask him a question?
Yeah.
Do you prefer the north of England or the south of England?
You know what? Actually, I prefer the
north. Answer
the
question.
These politicians answer.
I prefer the north, and the reason is that they're genuine. They are genuine. I mean, look, you can't have say everyone in the south, isn't very nice, and everyone in the north is lovely, because clearly that doesn't work. But what I would say, in the north, people are really genuine, and they've taken me into their heart. I'm not going to lose my accent, and that's what he picks me up on as well. But I was there on Friday at Old Trafford, because I'm a massive cricket fan. I still play. Yeah. I was in a party stand.
Yeah, were you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I wasn't dressed. I wasn't dressed as the guy in front of me. The guy in front of me had a cricket hat on, and he had about 15 pints in, and I was next to a load of Australians. I loved it. 28,000 people there.
It was great.
There's so much talk about trying to get equality in cricket, which I'm passionate about as well, on so many different levels. And then they announced that the next Test match, the next Ashes Test match in the north, we're not just talking Old Trafford, we're talking Headingley, the earliest will be 8 years from now, because obviously they only come about every 4 years. The next Ashes series, the most northerly ground is going to be Trent Bridge in Nottingham as well. You've written to the ECB about it. I don't know if you better change it, but we've got to spread this cricket around.
I went out there and gave it the big one on Friday, and I went on Test Match Special, which was also an honour as well as ringing the bell. So I got to appear on Test Match Special, and then it hammered down for 2 days. So my argument was somewhat undermined by the unreliable weather. But I think there's actually a lot of analysis, isn't there? That we're not. I know we say we're all rainy and everything, but it's actually not that different. And think back, Chris, to you both will know this. Some of the history with Ashes cricket at Old Trafford. Shane Warne's first ball that took out Mike Gatting's top of his off stump, having pitched well outside leg. Think of Jim Laker. You'll be too
I'm
young to know this, but 19 wickets.
Oh, he'll know.
Botham's Ashes, 81.
I appeared on a quiz show called Sports Anorak of the Year, answering questions on the Ashes from 1971 to 1991. I finished runner-up to a West Ham fan. So when it comes to Anorak questions about cricket, I am the person to speak to. But it's just such a shame. It's such a shame from the weather point of view, but also we have to spread the love. It can't just be about, the Oval, Lords.
100%. I mean, they've just had a report, haven't they, into the impact of class in cricket still. And the truth
doesn't help, does it?
No, if you then follow that up by saying, and by the way, there's no test in the north of England. I mean, no Ashes test. I mean, you're kind of looking like you've not really read that report, aren't you, and taken it on board. There was a brilliant atmosphere, wasn't there, at Old Trafford on Friday, as there always is at Headingley. The northern tests bring something different to Ashes series, but also to any test series, to be honest. And they should be really embracing what we're about rather than sort of freezing us out. So whether or not bad weather, I think, they do need to rethink that decision.
Yeah. So good stuff. We've had another Manchester International Festival as well recently. You've been all over the world banging the drum for Manchester and Manchester culture, including to Austin, Texas. So do you think there's any possibility that we could have something comparable to South by Southwest here in Manchester at some point?
I mean, just to say,
beyond the music,
does life
great.
get better than introducing New Order from the stage in Austin at South by
You're making me jealous
now.
Yeah.
That was a big
New
moment
Order, who are they?
as Mayor of Greater Manchester.
New Order.
You're showing your southern side again here, Chris. I think it is possible because it's actually well documented that South by Southwest took inspiration from In the City, which was a Tony Wilson conference that ran in the early 2000s. You might remember it. So now Tony's son, Ollie Wilson, is bringing a big music conference back to Manchester, beyond the music. And I better not sort of blow some of his sort of announcements because, I think, but there is talk going on with South by Southwest in terms of what involvement they may have. So beyond the music is the answer, Michael, and it is going to be different because it's going to be a parliament for music. It's going to be a sort of cooperatively owned event, and it's going to be about getting all voices in the industry coming forward. So it will bring something different. Yeah,
it has been rumoured that thebusiness.com will be hosting a session on the music industry at that event. So,
excellent.
Wow. You probably started that rumour yourself, Michael, on this podcast.
No, we're fully in support of what Ollie's doing.
I agree 100%. And he's a massive fan as well of Mr. Wilson. We normally end this podcast by discussing books or podcasts that we've read and listened to. I've just read Brian Horton's autobiography, 2000 Games. Are you reading any books at the moment or listening to any podcasts you want to share with our listeners and viewers?
I know this sounds like really stereotypical. As to
Northern Spin. I listen to Northern Spin. Is that
I've been rereading The Road to Wigan Pier by George Orwell. Because it was partly because of the book we're writing, Steve and I are writing, but it is alarming how much of what he describes is still kind of fundamentally there, the poor housing of the North. And I know you were after something light and holiday reading, but you put The Road to Wigan Pier as if you're doing a book about the north of England and about the need for change, then you would. I advise anybody, if you're interested in those things, to go back and pick that up and just work out how little has changed since the 1930s.
What about Stuart Maconie's stuff? Have you been looking back at any?
Always read. Oh yeah, I love Stuart's stuff. Pies and Prejudice was a firm favourite of mine, and I remember kind of picking up the theme from Stuart's book about how Liverpool and Manchester handled the American Civil War very differently, which was a revelation that I took from that. Indeed.
Well, I'm reading a book at the moment called The North Will Rise Again by Alex Niven.
Yeah,
who's a
great book.
It is. It features you in the beginning of
That's
it.
why
It mythologizes your choice of attire when you took on the government in October of the pandemic. And
that's in the People's History Museum now, that jacket. Can you believe?
Yeah, it's fantastic.
I know. I never thought I'd have. I still can't get my head around that, to be honest.
Yeah, good. Chris, we want to talk about women's football because your daughter Imogen plays in goal for Derby County.
Yeah, so brilliant. I'm watching. Yeah, she's 20, so a lot of travelling, but she loves it. So we're watching the Women's World Cup, currently being in Australia and New Zealand, where incidentally it's not stopped raining. You cannot buy a shirt of England goalkeeper Mary Earps. Man United's #1, outstanding in Saturday's win against Haiti. And the reason you can't buy a shirt is because Nike, their commercial strategy is not to produce goalkeeper shirts. Now, Mary Earps, she's named the best FIFA women's goalkeeper for 2022.
Well, hang on, Chris, you can buy a Pickford shirt.
Yeah, that's the point. Mary Earps has been working behind the scenes for a long time, since she became the #1 goalkeeper in the world. She said to people that she will try and help out so they can get a Mary Earps shirt. You cannot get a Mary Earps shirt because Nike won't produce it. It's an absolute disgrace. Well, is it something you can sort out, Andy?
Well, the Mayor of Greater Manchester is going to deliver a very much a firm diktat to Nike via the Northern Spin podcast, which is Nike, sort it out now. I mean, really, you should just not let the Women's World Cup end before this is sorted out. Mary is a fantastic role model ambassador for the women and girls game. A brilliant character. I've seen her speak at events. She's amazing. So many girls and young women in Greater Manchester will look up to her because of obviously who she plays for. How on earth they can justify this decision, I have no idea. And Nike, you just need to get it sorted. And I think that's the unanimous view of the Northern Spin podcast today.
Absolutely, 100%. That finally, Andy, you've been an outspoken supporter of fans' rights. You spoke at the European Fans Forum here in Manchester quite recently. We saw from the disgraceful way that fans were treated at the last 2 Champions League finals, both in Istanbul and in Paris last year, that the struggle to look after fans and their welfare is never ending. Prices are absolutely soaring right across football as well. I don't know if your season ticket at Everton's gone up, but certainly ours at Blackburn Rovers have. There was even a rebellion in Stockport when County tried to put the prices up over the summer. Football always seems to be in danger of eating itself, doesn't it? And how can politicians like you try to keep them honest, get them back on an even keel?
It does. Although I think Premier League clubs are better these days at involving supporters. Not perfect, but generally better. How can politicians sort it out? Well, there is an independent regulator coming, and I very much hope that there's cross-party support for that, because I think it is definitely needed. I think more challenge, though, needs to go in the direction of UEFA. It is frankly a disgrace that they had terrible scenes in Paris for the Champions League final in 2022, where, honestly, from what I heard about that, it was a miracle, really, that there wasn't more serious consequences, although they were serious from what happened. It is just unbelievable that they sent Manchester City supporters into an environment without basic arrangements. And I've heard from many City fans since they came back from Istanbul, obviously elated with what happened, but terrible stories about how people have been treated, and the just lack of organisation out there. It's honestly like UEFA just really don't care, do they? They pick these grounds for political reasons. They don't follow up on the organisation. And I think we really do need to hold them to account, because this can't, to have it 2 years running, it shows that they're not fulfilling their duty of care to football supporters.
And did you mention any of this did you meet anyone from UEFA when they came over to that fans forum?
And I said exactly what I've just said in my speech, and some of them came over to me at the end, and we had a bit of a chat about it. But I noticed that the head of UEFA came in and out of Manchester very quickly and didn't really do any interviews or anything. So I think UEFA owe Manchester City supporters a very fulsome apology, and they should also reimburse people who were left seriously out of pocket by their poor organisation.
Fantastic. Any more questions, Chris?
No. Well, we could have another one, but time's against us. But
will Everton stay up this year? There's one. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think you should do.
You will with the manager you've got now, for sure. But I don't think you're going to be playing. I don't think you'll be the first game on the match of the day.
No, probably not. Will City win the league?
I think City will. City are just an unbelievable team at the moment. But, Newcastle are throwing huge amounts at football.
I think United are quietly on the way back as well. I think they'll have a good year.
Basically, all northern teams, all northern teams. We've not mentioned Arsenal. We've not mentioned anyone from the south.
Well, Burnley and Sheffield United are going to get relegated, I think.
Oh, I know Vincent will do a good job at Burnley.
I don't want to hear it. Right.
Well, you're going to have to hear it. Put your biased
worst day of my life, that.
Okay, no,
views to one side. No, I think Burnley, Vincent, just let me say this really quickly. I've had the privilege of working with some amazing people in this city region since I was elected, but Vincent Company, it really right up there. Amazing what he did in dedicating his testimonial year to homelessness. But, we went to a homeless shelter in Ardwick 3 days after he scored that goal against Leicester and 2 days before they were going to Brighton to win the league. And he rang me up a couple of months ago and says, can we go back? It's 5 years. I want to go back and see where they're up to and what's going on. I mean, that is the mark of the man. And even as a Blackburn Rovers supporter, surely you've got to recognise that Vincent Company is a fine individual.
I recognise that Vincent Company did amazing things for homelessness in Manchester City.
That's as much as we're going to get, I'm afraid, Andy, because that's because he's so one-eyed about this. Wow, Michael.
Wow, Chris. How do you find that?
You know what? I had expectations of what that conversation would go like, and I think he exceeded every single one of them.
Yeah, same.
I have you down as being the fully paid up member of the Andy Burnham fan club, and I am now applying to join that club.
Well, then, to be fair, I have my doubts. I think he assuaged a few of them, where I think he's always got his eye on the prize. I think he answered that question about the return to Westminster. Fair play to you. You delivered it absolutely. Well, are you or not? And he's going to see out his third term.
Yeah, and my interpretation of that would be that he's committed to a third term, and if he wins that, which clearly he will, I think after that he's not ruled out Westminster, which I think actually would be a natural next step. But he's so excited. And the point that he made, there was a comment. If I was to take one comment, I said to him, what would you say to Keir Starmer if he phoned you up and asked you to join his team? And he said, Keir, I think I can do more for you here as the mayor of Greater Manchester. And he meant it. That's how I interpreted that.
Yeah, I don't think he gets enough credit for what he's achieving here for the people of Greater Manchester. Stuff like, the buses, the one pass for young kids and stuff like that. Obviously, he's at his best when he's at his most passionate, and he clearly was really lit up when he was talking about the technical education. He related his own experiences about university education, which you'll have had as a parent for your daughter at college as well. And, my experiences chime with that again with our lads. It's a lot of money. It's a big chunk of change, is $9,000 a year plus, and all the living costs on top. Does it deliver great value?
No. And the thing is that what I'm not used to is a politician giving a straight answer to a straight question. You came up with a really left field question, and I thought to myself, because we're talking a bit about cricket, so I thought it'll play that with a straight bat. You asked him that is fundamentally what drives him, his Catholic values of doing the right thing. And he came up with just a brilliant response.
Yeah, his familiarisation with the catechism, we could do an entirely another podcast for another hour about his visit to meet Pope Francis and all the rest of it, but that's not what we're here to talk about.
But I asked him a question about Gary Neville, and I said, what do you think about Gary Neville?
Did you think he was going to diss him?
No, I didn't think he was going to diss him. See, Gary Neville is a bit of a Marmite character. You love him or you hate him. What I would say is that if you cut him open, he bleeds Manchester, and he's passionate about doing the right thing. Whether you like him or not, I like him. I've got a huge amount of respect for him as well. Now, clearly, Andy Burnham's got to get on with Gary Neville because they work and they operate in the same city. But he used an analogy which I love, and he said the thing about Gary Neville, what drives him, is that he sees inequality and he steps in and does something about it, and he won't walk on by and do nothing. And I just thought that was quite a powerful image as well. But I just hope, because we asked about Westminster, and I asked him a question about, the forces that are at play and the backstabbing and the...
That really annoyed him, didn't it? Not your question,
no.
But I meant I think you got to the root about what it is that really got under his skin and why he said what he did about the whispers in the corners and the briefings from anonymous people. That really gets his goat. And it seems to be counter to how he wants to operate. He's a very straight up guy. Which
was the reason why him and Steve Rotherham decided in 2016, I think it was, to leave Westminster. But what was impressive about him, and I've always felt that he works really well, Andy Burnham, in an audience. He relates to people. People find him likeable. It would be difficult not to like anything about him. If I was to throw a hand grenade in there and say, was there anything in there that, in terms of Keir Starmer, should take note of, and also Rishi Sunak? Because this wasn't a political interview, was it? It wasn't. This wasn't the Tories are awful. Everything is Labour, everything's rosy in Keir Starmer's garden, because he said that there's things that Starmer and Labour have got to do to ram their message home and the advantage that they've currently got.
Yeah, I think what was interesting was when we were discussing the MBAC, the Manchester Baccalaureate, I threw at him that Gillian Keegan had tried to, kind of make it and politicise it. And he just kind of went, yeah, it's all part of the game, really. I think in private, they've probably had much more constructive discussions than maybe her intervention would suggest.
I asked him about the 3 by-election results, and there was one thing that he said which I disagreed with. So obviously he said Labour had a great result in North Yorkshire, in Selby
which
and
they
Hampstead. Yeah, and then Lib Dems, obviously tactical voting had a big part to play in Somerton and Frome when they overturned that majority as well. And that in Uxbridge and Ruislip, Boris Johnson's old constituency, he described it as a good vote for the Conservative, good vote for Labour. And I said, well, was it a good vote for Labour?
Well, they didn't win.
They didn't win, but they narrowed the majority from 7,000 to less than 500. But he seemed to preempt the ULEZ question as well, didn't he? And when you asked him what his biggest frustration was during his time as Mayor of Greater Manchester.
Yeah, it was CLEZ.
Yeah, it was. It was the
Clean Air Zone. CAS.
Yeah, the Clean Air Zone.
Yeah. I'm glad he fronted that one out anyway, because I do think that was a mess.
Yeah,
a real mess.
Yeah. And like I say, I think the thing is, what I hope, and I said this, is that I hope, because obviously we are very big in Denmark, but I hope the people, the Mandarins in Westminster, listen to that and say, actually, why is his personal popularity so high? Why is he the King of the North? Why has he got a reputation for getting things done? And I think it comes through in that 50-minute interview that he did with us. And that is the thing that I take out of this interview today.
Yeah, no, good. So this has been the Northern Spin podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. We've had a special guest today. It's been great, hasn't it?
Super.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's all for episode 10 of season 4. In fact, it's everything for season 4, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we're back in
ending
September.
on a high note. We will be back once we sort some sponsorship out.
Yeah.
Hint, hint. Yeah, but we're on Apple Podcasts. Please review us. Don't forget to press the subscribe button. Follow us on Twitter at Northern_spin1 or watch us on YouTube. Thank you to What Media for recording this podcast and our sponsors, FI Real Estate Management. Special mention to Elliot Taylor for providing the music. My name is Michael Taylor.
And my name is Chris Maguire.